What if the most terrifying weapon of World War II wasn't the enemy? What if it was your own plane? For the crews of the B-29 Superfortress, this was a living nightmare. This was America's $3 billion super weapon, costing more than the atomic bomb itself. It was designed to rain fire on Japan. Instead, it was burning on runways in Kansas. It wasn't combat. It wasn't flak. It was its own engines, cooking themselves alive at 600 degrees. Pilots had a grim nickname for it: the Flying Funeral Pyre. The failure rate was catastrophic, 35%. How did America's greatest technological achievement become its deadliest engineering failure? Why couldn't the world's best engineers at Boeing and Wright stop the fires? This is the declassified story of the crisis that nearly grounded the entire B-29 program. And the one man who saw the solution, not an engineer, not a scientist, but a 38-year-old plumber from Cleveland, who was about to save thousands of lives. To understand how he did it, you first have to understand the monster he was fighting. A marvel of engineering. That was also a death trap. The Wright R-3350 duplex cyclone. On paper, it was a masterpiece, the most powerful radial engine ever built. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, 2,200 horsepower, capable of pushing the B-29 to 350 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. On paper, it was magnificent. In reality, it was a death trap. The problem, in one word, was heat. Specifically, rear cylinder heat. Each R-3350 engine had 9 cylinders in the front row and 9 in the rear. The front cylinders, they were fine. They got plenty of cooling air, a 200-mile-per-hour blast of ram air rushing through the engine cowling. But the rear cylinders, they sat in the shadow of the front row. They were starved for airflow. Temperatures in those rear cylinders would climb to 550 degrees Fahrenheit during normal operation. During high-power climbs like takeoff, temperatures would spike to 650 degrees. This was the crisis. The aluminum cylinder heads would begin to warp at 500 degrees. The critical exhaust valves would fail at 575. And at 600 degrees, the entire cylinder could seize, causing the piston to stop moving. While the crankshaft continued rotating at 2,800 RPM, the result was an explosion. Connecting rods snapped like twigs. Pistons punched through cylinder walls. Hot oil sprayed across superheated metal. And then, the magnesium alloy engine casing itself would ignite, burning at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt through the main wing spar in just 90 seconds. The B-29's onboard fire suppression system was useless. The fire was burning inside the engine, where the extinguishing agent couldn't reach it. Boeing's engineers tried everything. They increased the size of the cooling air intake. It didn't work. Rear cylinders still overheated. They installed larger oil coolers. A marginal improvement, but not enough. They redesigned the cowl flaps, the adjustable panels at the rear of the engine that control cooling airflow. The new design created so much aerodynamic drag that pilots couldn't fully open the flaps during takeoff without losing critical airspeed. They were trapped. Every solution created a new, deadlier problem. Wright Aeronautical, the engine's manufacturer, sent a team of their best engineers to investigate. They tore the engine apart, and they found a clue. The cylinder baffles, thin aluminum sheets designed to direct cooling air over the cylinder heads, had insufficient clearance. There was barely half an inch of space between the baffles and the cylinder's cooling fins. Air couldn't flow efficiently through such a narrow gap. It was like trying to breathe through a pinched straw. The solution seemed obvious. Increase the clearance. Redesign the baffles. Give the air more room to flow? But there was a problem. A massive problem. The entire B-29, the cowling, the wing, the internal structure, was already designed around the existing baffle configuration. Changing the baffles meant changing the cowling. Changing the cowling meant changing the wing structure. Changing the wing structure meant redesigning the entire aircraft. Boeing estimated it would take 18 months and cost $50 million to implement such changes across the production line. General Arnold didn't have 18 months. He didn't have 18 weeks. The first B-29 combat missions were scheduled for June 5, 1944, less than 12 weeks away. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the predecessor to NASA, gets involved. In June 1944, they bring a B-29 to their aircraft engine research laboratory in Cleveland, Ohio. Teams of engineers in white lab coats run the engines in their massive altitude wind tunnel, simulating flight conditions at 30,000 feet. They hook up dozens of sensors. They run calculations, and they confirm what everyone already knows: inadequate airflow to the rear cylinders. But here is the expert consensus, the official multi-million-dollar answer from the smartest men in the country. The problem is fundamentally unsolvable without a complete engine redesign. The R-3350 is simply too powerful, generating too much heat in too small a package. The laws of thermodynamics, they said, are against us. By September 1944, the situation is desperate. The B-29s are now in combat, flying from China, and the losses are staggering. 414 B-29s will be lost during World War II. Only 147 will be shot down by enemy action. The other 267, nearly two-thirds, will be lost to engine fires and mechanical failures, lost to their own engines. The 20th Air Force is losing bombers faster than Boeing can build them. Crews are terrified. Pilots are openly requesting transfers to B-17s and B-24s. Older, slower, less capable aircraft? Because at least those planes didn't randomly catch fire and explode over friendly territory. At Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, at the NACA laboratory in Cleveland, at Boeing's plant in Wichita, everywhere the best aviation minds in America are working on this problem, the answer is the same. There is no solution, not without starting over. What they don't know is that in a drafty, oil-stained maintenance hangar at Pratt Army Airfield, a mechanic who used to install copper pipes in Cleveland basements is staring at an R-3350 engine and thinking about water pressure. Antonio Tony Validor is nobody's idea of an aircraft engineer. He isn't a somebody at all. Born in 1906 in Cleveland's Little Italy neighborhood, Tony is the son of immigrants. He drops out of school at age 14 to help support his family. His father runs a small plumbing business, residential work mostly, installing sinks, fixing toilets, running water lines through old stubborn houses where the pipes don't want to cooperate with the walls. Tony learns the trade the hard way, crawling through dark frozen basements, frozen knuckles, busted shins, figuring out how to route pipes through impossible tiny spaces. By age 20, he's one of the best troubleshooters in Cleveland. When water won't flow, when pressure mysteriously drops between floors, when a new heating system develops baffling cold spots, Tony is the guy who figures out why. The secret, Tony learns, is understanding flow. Water doesn't care about blueprints. It doesn't care about theory. It is lazy. It takes the path of least resistance. If you want water to go somewhere, you don't force it. You guide it. You create a path where flowing is easier than not flowing. When the war starts in 1941, Tony is 35 years old. He's too old for combat, but young enough for war work. He applies to Curtiss Wright, thinking his experience with pipes and fluid flow might translate to aircraft manufacturing. They assign him to engine maintenance at Pratt Army Airfield. Tony has never worked on an aircraft before. Everything he knows about these multi-thousand horsepower engines comes from a 3-week training course. But he knows pipes, he knows flow, and when he looks at the R-3350 engine, really looks at it, the way a plumber looks at a problem water system, He sees something the PhD engineers, with their wind tunnels and slide rules, completely missed. It's September 1944. Tony is working the night shift, performing routine maintenance on engine number 3 of a B-29. This plane suffered an overheat warning during a training flight. The pilot was smart, shutting down the engine before it could catch fire, so Tony's job is just to inspect for damage. He removes the cowling panels and stares at the rear cylinders, blackened and heat-stressed. The cooling fins are discolored, a telltale sign of sustained, dangerous temperatures. Tony traces the path the cooling air is supposed to take. It enters through the intake at the front of the cowling. It flows over the front cylinders. Then, in theory, it's supposed to flow between the cylinder rows to cool the rear cylinders. But looking at the actual physical geometry, Tony realizes something. It's a lie. The air isn't flowing. It's stagnating. The front cylinders heat the incoming air to 300 degrees. That hot air tries to flow rearward, but there's no clear exit path. The air gets trapped between the cylinder rows, growing hotter and hotter, until it's actually heating the rear cylinders instead of cooling them. It's exactly like that time Tony had to fix the 3rd floor radiators in that apartment building on Euclid Avenue. The hot water was taking the easy path, straight to the 2nd floor, and never reaching the 3rd floor. Why? Because there was no pressure differential forcing it upward. The solution then was simple. Tony installed a small bypass pipe. He redirected some of the flow, creating a new, easier path for the hot water to reach the 3rd floor. Standing in the maintenance hangar, staring at a $4 million aircraft engine, Tony thinks, what if I do the same thing here? What if, instead of trying to force cooling air through the engine, I route it around? He sketches it out on the back of a maintenance log. Small pipes, ducting, a bypass system. It would redirect cooling air from the main intake, around the front cylinders, and shoot it directly onto the rear cylinders. It would create a dedicated cooling path, one that doesn't depend on the chaotic, failing airflow between the cylinder rows. It's simple, almost stupidly simple, which is exactly why Tony knows the engineers will hate it. Tony spends the next 3 nights building his prototype. He can't use official channels. He can't requisition parts or get engineering approval. He knows exactly what will happen. The engineers will look at his 7th grade education, his plumber's background, his grease-stained fingernails, and they will laugh him out of the office. So, Tony improvises. He becomes a scavenger. He borrows aluminum tubing from a damaged B-29 that's awaiting salvage. He borrows a cutting torch from the welding shop. He uses tin snips to modify the cylinder baffles, creating new openings. He hand fabricates small aluminum ducts, essentially pipes that route cooling air around the front cylinders and aim it directly at the rear. The ducts are crude. They are hand-formed, held together with sheet metal screws and high-temperature sealant. They look like something a plumber cobbled together in a basement, because that's exactly what they are. But the principle is sound. Instead of hoping air will naturally flow rearward through a complex maze of obstructions, Tony's ducts force the air along a dedicated, low-resistance path. It's the same principle as a water bypass line. Create an easy path directly to where the flow is needed most. On the night of October 3, 1944, Tony finishes the installation. He's modified the Wright inboard engine of B-29, serial number 42-24605. It's a training aircraft that, by sheer luck, is already scheduled for an engine test run the next morning. He doesn't tell anyone. He doesn't tell his sergeant. He doesn't tell the engineering officer. He just signs off on the maintenance report. Cooling system inspection complete. Engine cleared for test. The next morning, Captain James Wheeler is assigned to perform the engine run-up. It's a standard, boring procedure. Run the engine through its power settings. Monitor temperatures. Check for anomalies. Wheeler climbs into the cockpit and advances the throttle. The R-3350 spools up to full power, 2,800 RPM, 2,200 horsepower. The noise is deafening. The entire airframe shakes. Wheeler's eyes scan the instrument panel. His gaze locks on the temperature gauge for the rear cylinders of engine 3. Normally, that gauge climbs to 550 degrees within 90 seconds. Wheeler watches and waits. The gauge holds, 425 degrees. It doesn't budge. Wheeler thinks the gauge is broken. It must be. He continues the test for 5 minutes at full power. This is longer than normal, longer than safe if something is actually wrong. Rear cylinder temperature, 430 degrees. Front cylinders, 410 degrees. The rear cylinders are actually running cooler than the fronts. This isn't just a fix. This is impossible. Wheeler shuts down the engine and immediately reports to the engineering officer. Something's wrong with number 3, sir. Temperature readings are impossible. The gauge must be faulty. They send a maintenance crew to investigate, to replace the broken gauge. That's when they discover Tony's modification. When the engineering officer, a lieutenant with an aeronautics degree from Purdue, sees the hand-fabricated aluminum ducts, he goes ballistic. Who authorized this? Who performed an unauthorized modification to a combat aircraft engine? This is a court-martial offense. Tony is pulled from the flight line. He's brought before Major Donald Peterson, the Chief of Aircraft Maintenance. Peterson is a career officer. He does not like surprises. Did you modify that engine without authorization, Sergeant? Yes, sir. Do you understand you could face criminal charges? Unauthorized modifications to military aircraft. That's sabotage in wartime, sir. The rear cylinders ran 60 degrees cooler. Peterson stops. What did you say? The rear cylinders. They ran 60 degrees cooler. I have a solution to the overheating problem. Peterson stares at him. A long, hard, silent stare. You have a solution, son? NACA has 50 engineers working on this problem. Wright Aeronautical has their entire design team on it. Boeing has, with respect, sir, they're all overthinking it. It's not an aeronautics problem. It's a plumbing problem. The air needs a dedicated flow path. I gave it one. You're a mechanic. You don't have the qualifications to, I'm a plumber, sir. And in plumbing, when fluid won't flow where you need it, you add a bypass. That's all I did. Major Peterson looks at the temperature logs from Captain Wheeler's test run. 60 degrees cooler. Sustained full power operation with no temperature rise. That's impossible, Peterson says, mostly to himself. Permission to run another test, sir. Let me prove it's not. October 5th, 1944. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The epicenter of Army Air Forces engineering. Major Peterson doesn't trust Tony's modification, but he can't ignore the temperature data. He forwards the test results to Wright Field with a simple, cryptic note. Mechanic-modified R-3350 cooling system. Achieved 60-degree temperature reduction. Recommend immediate evaluation. 2 days later, Tony Validor finds himself on a C-47 transport plane to Dayton. He's carrying his hand-built aluminum ducts in a canvas bag, like a plumber bringing his tools to a new job site. At Wright Field, he's escorted to a conference room. Waiting for him are 12 men. Engineers from Wright Aeronautical, engineers from Boeing, experts from NACA, and top officers from the Army Air Forces. They've heard about the plumber's modification. They are not impressed. But there's one other man in the room, sitting quietly in the back. A man who wasn't scheduled to be there. Colonel Curtis E. LeMay. LeMay is the legendary cigar-chomping commander of the B-29 program in the Pacific. He's visiting Wright Field to demand answers. He needs B-29s that don't catch fire. He doesn't care who solves the problem. He just wants it solved. And he has zero tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense. The meeting is about to begin. Dr. Harrison Evans, Chief Aeronautical Engineer from Wright Aeronautical, opens the meeting. He looks at Tony not as a savior, but as a problem. Sergeant Validor, we've reviewed your interesting temperature data. While the results are compelling, we have significant concerns about your approach. What concerns, sir? For starters, you've created turbulent flow paths that violate fundamental principles of aerodynamic cooling design. The ducts you've installed, he says, with clear disdain, actually reduce total cooling airflow by approximately 8%, according to our calculations. Tony doesn't blink. But the rear cylinders run cooler. Well, it's probably a measurement error. The thermocouples may have been improperly positioned after your modification. Tony reaches into his canvas bag and pulls out a second set of temperature logs. I ran 3 more tests, sir. Different thermocouples. Same results. Rear cylinders consistently 50 to 65 degrees cooler than baseline. A Boeing engineer speaks up, his voice heavy with annoyance. Even if your data is accurate, Sergeant, your modification is completely impractical for production. Those hand-fabricated ducts would require custom manufacturing. We can't tool up for something like this across the entire fleet. Why not? They're just aluminum tubes. Any sheet metal shop can make them. Because they're not engineered. There's no stress analysis, no vibration testing, no long-term durability assessment. They're cooling ducts, sir, not load-bearing structures. The room erupts. One engineer shouts, "You don't understand the complexity. These engines cost $35,000 each." Another slams his notebook. We can't just let mechanics start modifying engines based on hunches. This is exactly the kind of cowboy engineering that gets people killed. Then, a voice from the back of the room cuts through the noise. A low, gravelly drawl. "Gentlemen, shut up." Colonel Curtis LeMay stands up. The room goes absolutely silent. LeMay looks at Tony. "Sergeant, I have B-29s burning up on Saipan. I have crews refusing to fly because they're more afraid of their own engines than they are of Japanese fighters. Now, you're telling me you can fix this problem with some aluminum tubes?" "Yes, sir," LeMay nods, then turns to Dr. Evans. "And these experts are telling me it can't work because it's not properly engineered. Is that about right?" Dr. Evans hesitates. "Well, Colonel, the principles are—" "I don't care about principles," LeMay snaps. He turns back to Dr. Evans. "How long has Wright Aeronautical been working on this cooling problem?" "Since early 1943, Colonel. Approximately 20 months. 20 months? And what solutions have you implemented?" We've made incremental improvements to cylinder head design, modified the baffle clearances within existing constraints. Has any of it worked?" Silence. LeMay's voice drops, becoming even more dangerous. "I asked you a question, Doctor. Has any of it worked?" Not to the degree we'd hoped." LeMay picks up Tony's temperature logs. Sergeant Validor achieved a 60-degree temperature reduction with aluminum tubes he made in a maintenance hangar. In one night, using scrap parts, he drops the logs on the conference table. "Here's what's going to happen. You are going to take Sergeant Validor's modification. You are going to engineer it properly. Stress analysis, vibration testing, whatever you need to do. And you are going to get it into production. Not in 20 months. Not in 20 weeks. In 20 days. Dr. Evans is pale. "Colonel, that's impossible." LeMay leans in. "Then you'd better work fast, because in 30 days, I'm bombing Japan with 500 B-29s, and I need engines that don't burn up over the Pacific. Sergeant Validor has shown you how to fix it. Now do your job, and implement it." The room is silent. LeMay turns to Tony. "Sergeant, you'll remain at Wright Field as a technical consultant. These gentlemen are going to have questions about your modification. You'll answer them?" "Yes, sir." LeMay heads for the door, then stops and looks back at Tony. "And Sergeant, don't let these engineers overcomplicate this. Sometimes the best solution is the simple one." October 15th, 1944. Wright Field Testing Facility. Tony's modification undergoes the most intensive testing in aviation history. Wright Aeronautical's engineers, under LeMay's impossible deadline, take his crude, hand-fabricated ducts and reverse engineer them. They create proper technical drawings. They run computational fluid dynamics analyses. They install calibrated thermocouples at 36 different measurement points throughout the engine. The testing protocol is brutal. Run the engine at full power for 2 hours straight, twice as long as any B-29 would ever maintain maximum power in actual operations. The results shock everyone. Baseline R-3350. Without modification. Front cylinder temperature, 410 degrees average. Rear cylinder temperature, 565 degrees average. Peak rear cylinder temperature, 627 degrees. Time to exhaust valve failure at full power, 73 minutes. Now, the modified R-3350 with Validor's Tony ducts. Front cylinder temperature, 415 degrees average. Rear cylinder temperature, 445 degrees average. Peak rear cylinder temperature, 478 degrees. Time to exhaust valve failure at full power. No failures observed after 180 minutes. The rear cylinders are running 120 degrees cooler. The temperature differential between front and rear, which was 155 degrees, is now just 30 degrees. Dr. Evans runs the numbers 3 times, convinced there must be an error. There isn't. How is this possible? He asks Tony. The ducts actually reduce total cooling airflow by 8%. You're moving less air, but achieving better cooling. Tony shrugs. It's not about how much air, sir. It's about getting the air where it's needed. Those rear cylinders weren't getting any airflow at all. The air was taking an easier path. The ducts force the air to go where it doesn't want to go naturally. But that violates the principle of minimizing flow restriction. No offense, sir, but I don't know what that means. I just know that in plumbing, sometimes you need to restrict flow in one place to create pressure in another. It's the same idea. The engineers spend days trying to optimize Tony's design. They try different duct diameters, different materials, different routing paths. Nothing works better than Tony's original concept. On October 28, 1944, Colonel LeMay approves emergency implementation. Boeing receives the technical drawings on October 30th. By November 15th, they have retooled their production line to include the cooling ducts. Crews will simply call them Tony ducts. November 24, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The first B-29s equipped with Tony's modification arrive in the Pacific. Captain Robert Fitzgerald pilots the B-29 City of Los Angeles on the first combat test, a bombing mission against the Musashino aircraft plant near Tokyo. Distance, 3,000 miles round trip. Time at high power, approximately 9 hours. It's a nightmare for engine cooling. Fitzgerald's flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Mike Romano, monitors the engine instruments obsessively. Romano has 3 engine fires in his logbook. He knows the warning signs. 2 hours into the mission, Romano's eyes lock on number 3's rear cylinder gauge. It reads 438 degrees. He checks it again. He taps the glass. He checks the circuit breaker. Captain, I think we got a faulty temp gauge on number 3. What's it reading? Rear cylinders showing 438. That's impossible. We've been at cruise power for 2 hours. You think number 3 is actually running hot and the gauge is lying to us? No, sir. I think it's actually running cool, but that doesn't make sense. They continue the mission. 9 hours total. The longest Fitzgerald has ever kept a B-29 at sustained high power. Number 3 engine never exceeds 455 degrees. When they land back at Saipan, Romano inspects the engine. No signs of heat stress. No discoloration. The cooling fins look like they just came out of the factory. Over the next 3 weeks, the data pours in. Pre-modification. B-29 engine fires per 100 flight hours. 4.2. Post-modification. B-29 engine fires per 100 flight hours. 0.7. the modification reduces engine fires by 83%. By March 1945, Boeing has retrofitted over 2,100 B-29s. Wright Aeronautical incorporates it into all new engines. The impact is staggering. Before the modification, the 20th Air Force was losing approximately 22 B-29s per month to engine fires. After the modification, 4 per month, a conservative estimate, Tony Validor's cooling ducts saved 216 B-29s over the final 12 months of the war, at 11 crew members per aircraft. That's 2,376 American lives. But the broader impact is strategic. With reliable engines, B-29s can sustain the bombing campaign, the firebombing of Tokyo, the destruction of Japanese war industries, ultimately, the atomic bomb missions to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. None of it happens without B-29s that can fly 3,000-mile missions without their engines catching fire. After the war, captured Japanese Army documents reveal their assessment. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe wrote in his diary, "In autumn 1944, we believed the B-29 program was failing. Their engines were unreliable. Our intelligence indicated high mechanical loss rates. We calculated that the Americans could not sustain operations." Then, in December 1944, everything changed. The B-29s came in greater numbers. They flew longer missions. Their engines no longer failed over our territory. We realized we had lost the air war. June 1945, Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The war in Europe is over. Japan is weeks from surrender. Tony Validor is being processed for discharge, heading back to civilian life. Before he leaves, they try to give him a medal, the Army Commendation Medal, for technical innovation that significantly contributed to the war effort. Tony refuses it. "I didn't do anything special," he tells the colonel. "I just fixed a cooling problem. That's what mechanics do." "Sergeant, your modification saved over 200 aircraft and thousands of lives. Then give the medal to the crews who flew the missions. They're the heroes. I just installed some aluminum pipes." Tony returns to Cleveland. He goes back to plumbing. He never mentions his war work to his clients. In 1947, a reporter from the Cleveland plane dealer discovers the story. Local plumbers saved the B-29 program. The reporter wants a feature article. Tony declines the interview. "I don't want publicity. I did my job. That's all there is to it." The article runs on page 7. Few people notice. Tony Validor's bypass cooling concept becomes standard practice in aircraft engine design. Modern turbofan engines, the Pratt & Whitney F135 that powers the F-35, the General Electric GE9X on the Boeing 777X. They all use sophisticated versions of the same principle. Directed cooling, Tony Validor died in 1982, at age 76, still working as a plumber. His obituary made no mention of the B-29 program. No mention of 2,376 lives saved. At his funeral, one mourner stood quietly in the back, a man in his 60s who nobody recognized. After the service, he approached Tony's son. "I flew B-29s in the Pacific," the man said. 35 missions. "My crew came home because our engines didn't catch fire. I didn't know your father personally, but I've spent 40 years trying to find the mechanic who invented those cooling ducts. I wanted to thank him." Tony's son was confused. "My father never said anything about inventing anything. He always said he was just a plumber." The veteran smiled sadly. "That sounds like the kind of man who'd save 2,000 lives and never think it was a big deal." Sometimes the greatest innovations don't come from experts with advanced degrees. Sometimes they come from someone who spent 15 years running pipes through Cleveland basements and understood one simple truth: flow takes the path of least resistance. If you need it to go somewhere else, build it a better path.